you. It's interesting, isn't it? Every table's reflect that mixing, the good and the bad. All right, the good and the bad. All right, now what I want you to do now, thanks, Chris, is just swing your chairs so you can see me. I've got a little talk that I want to share with you, and it'll make it hard for you if you're not facing me. Within 5 minutes, you'll have a crick in your neck, and then the chiropractor next door will be delighted. So I'd rather we didn't add to his coffers unnecessarily. So if you can just swing and look at me, that'd be great. I just want to reflect on, I'm going to reflect a little bit on my dad tonight. That'll be part of what I want to share with you, and that will be hopefully both useful to you a little bit too. But I want to begin with a short Bible reading, and I want to, as a Bible reading, I want to take an extract from a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to a small church in Philippi, which is in modern Macedonia. There's, if you can see the map, probably can't, but Philippi is one of those towns that sits right up the top of the map there. And this little town, this little church in Philippi had been this faithful partner to Paul as he had travelled across the Roman Empire teaching people about Jesus. And the section I'm about to read to you comes at the start of the letter when he's in prison and he's thanking them on one occasion for their partnership with him in sharing the good news of Jesus. And this is what he said to that little church, and I just want to read it with you. Paul says, "I thank my God in all my remembrance of you." That's the little church. "Always in every prayer of mine for you, all making my prayer with joy." So remember them with joy. "Because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ." All right, so there's his assurance. This apostle in prison, thanking God for them, and then saying to you, on one thing I'm certain of, one thing I'm very confident of, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. Let me just share a little bit from my own father, and this will hopefully set it up. 2 years ago, my siblings and I buried my father, and we buried him with a lot of mixed emotions. Dad had been a great father, and there was much that we could be thankful for. As siblings, as reflected on Dad, he'd modelled for us living for God as a priority. That was the priority of my father's life throughout, and he'd been unwavering in that commitment, and that was a huge gift that he gave us as kids. He communicated to us continually when growing up that living for God, obeying his word, was the best way to live, and he reinforced that over and over again. But Dad had also been hard to live with at times, and we'd all received a bit of hurt from Dad over the years, some of us more than others. My dad also left us. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and my dad left us at the end with a lot of unfinished projects. And we're still, 2 years later, we're still trying to sort those projects out. He left us with a farm that was intended to turn into a Christian convention centre. That farm he'd bought both to give it to us as kids to enjoy, but also then he got very sidetracked at one point, and so there was a lot of unfinished project that we're still dealing with there. He also left us with a mine that he wanted to start on that farm, on one of the farms. He bought 3 actually. He bought 1. Oh, that's not enough. Bought the one next door. Oh, that's not enough. I'll buy the one in the back. And so he also left us with an unfinished mine project that he'd started that he wanted to realise for work for mission. And so that gives you a feeling for where my dad's heart was. But he left us with a lot of work to do that we're still sorting out. But as I look back, not only did Dad leave us with a lot of uncompleted projects, but Dad himself, in many ways, was an uncompleted project. There was so much about my dad that changed in the last 5 years. My father died of dementia, and I've often said that the last 5 years of his life, even though the dementia was coming, was actually the best years of his life for us as kids in some ways, because dementia changed Dad for the good. But there was much that changed about Dad in the last 5 years. He became more and more beautiful. He still retained some challenging areas, but overall became softer and much more loving, which is unusual. You know, that doesn't generally happen with dementia, but that happened with my dad. He became softer and much more loving. Much of that change was still happening when he died, and he died really as an unfinished project. I wish that he'd had more life, because the changes that we're seeing were beautiful, and I'd, in a sense, loved if we'd been able to see more of that coming, but that wasn't to be. But the interesting thing is that I see in myself, as I enter the final season of my life, I see much of me that's still an unfinished project too. There's so many dreams that I've had that will never come about. There's so many things I've longed to do that I'll never get the life and opportunity to do. There's so many changes in myself that I wanted to see happen that still are in process of happening. And so I'm still very much an unfinished project in many ways as I reflect honestly on my life. But also, as I think about it more deeply, I realise that I'm an unfinished project between two unfinished projects. There was my father that was never finished. There's me that's not really finished. And then there's my kids that are coming who are still unfinished as well. Above me is Dad, who was an unfinished project. Below me are my kids, who are still unfinished projects. And because, this is the interesting thing, it's because we're unfinished, all right, we hurt one another. My dad hurt us, and I'm hurt my kids. And I know that hurt continues. My dad hurt me because he was unfinished, and I will hurt my kids because I'm unfinished. And I trust that my kids can do better on the other side of it. So that's where we sit as human beings, between two generations. The generation above that sometimes loved us, but sometimes hurt us. The generation below that we sometimes hurt and sometimes equipped. But we sit as three generations, in a sense, all unfinished. So tonight, just for a few moments, I want to think about how we need to respond to those two generations. How we need to respond to the generation above, our fathers, and how we need to respond to the generation below, our kids. Now, some of you are single and you still haven't got kids yet, but in a sense, still this applies to you. This is a helpful way tonight to understand how to act to kids if God gives them to you, or how to act as kids that you might adopt in some ways, even if God doesn't give you kids of your own. So there's elements there right across the board. So firstly, I want to just talk about dealing with our fathers. Jared, I've lost. There we go. Great. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage tonight as I sit here and as I talk to you, because I don't really know your father, or I don't know what sort of father you had. Some of you might have had amazing fathers, and as you sat in the discussion groups tonight, you were struggling to find anything negative to say about your dad. Others of you might have had it a bit both ways, things that you could celebrate, but things that you actually got hurt by badly. Some of you, as we learned, never had a father around, and so you never knew a dad growing up. Others of you might have had very negative experiences of fathering, and some of you might have experienced abuse or something similar. And if you fall into that latter group, and you've never spoken to anyone meaningfully about that experience, then my encouragement tonight to you is to make sure you do. Childhood abuse leaves scars that travel with us in profound ways. So let me make this first point as forcibly as I can. Abuse is never okay. Okay, abuse is never okay. It's amazing how our heads will play tricks with us. Children that have been abused often get to a point of saying, well, it's all my fault. They start to blame themselves. That's a lie. That's just your head tricking you. It's not the case. Abuse is never okay. And I want to emphasise that tonight before I say anything else. All right? If you need to, if you've never spoken to anybody about that, then come to me at the end and I can point you in that direction of somebody if we need to. But apart from those situations where abuse is involved, or sometimes even when it is, how are we going to deal with the hurt that comes from bad experiences with our father? Now, if your dad is still alive, and we know already that a lot of our fathers are dead, but if your dad is still alive, sometimes it will be important to go back and maybe speak to dad about some of the pain you experienced growing up. But that still leaves you with a question of, what about a case where my father has already passed away, or you know in advance that dad won't receive that kind of thing well, and it's almost like a dead-end street, then what are you to do with that? Well, the Bible talks about the importance of forgiving others who have hurt you or have sinned against you. But let me say to you that sometimes forgiving those that have hurt us can be a very, very hard thing to do. I actually think it's unfortunate sometimes when Christians run around probably normally Christians that have never experienced that, when Christians run around saying, we just got to forgive. Just forgive and move on. And let me say to you, that's easier said than done for those of you that have been hurt badly. Just forgive and forget doesn't really help much when the scars and the pain are very real to you. And so while it's true that we need to learn to forgive, sometimes we've got to recognise that forgiving is a journey, and it's a hard journey. For most of my adult life, I carried a lot of anger towards my dad for some of the things that he'd done to me, some of the things he'd done to his family. And the biggest blessing of these last 5 years that I had with my dad was that somehow God took that anger away. I'm not sure how it happened. The knowledge of what he'd done still remained. That was still there. But the anger towards him for that somehow disappeared. I don't know exactly how it happened, but I know it happened. And the reason I know it happened is because often as siblings, when we got together, we'd be talking about Dad, and it'd just come up again, the ways he'd hurt us. And in that last 5 years, strangely, I found that I didn't want to contribute to that conversation, that I could acknowledge that it happened, but I didn't want to add to it. I didn't feel the necessity to add to it. And that helped me to understand that somehow God had worked in my heart to help me start to forgive my dad, for I no longer held it against him. I think that's the essence of forgiveness, all right? Forgiveness is, you can't forget the past. It's not forget and move on. You can never forget the past. But what you can do is you can no longer hold that past against the person. And that's what strangely happened for me in those 5 years. Somehow I just stopped holding that stuff against Dad, and I could genuinely just love him. And it still blows me away today to think that that was actually what happened. In many ways, in the last 5 years, I fell in love with my dad. That's a strange way to express it, isn't it? But it's true. I didn't really love my dad early. In the last 5 years, I fell in love with him. How did that happen? Well, I'm not still sure how that happened, but let me tell you, there was one thing that helped me on the journey of loving Dad in a fresh way, and of also not holding those things against him in a way. Okay, this is one of the things that I discovered. The journey to forgiveness can start with recognising that our fathers had fathers who were also unfinished projects. Right? Our fathers had fathers who were also unfinished projects. So all our fathers received a blessing or a curse. That became part of who they were, and that became part of how they passed that on to us. My father's dad died when my father was very young, I think maybe 6 or 7. My grandfather died. And so my father never had a dad growing up, or never knew a dad growing up. In fact, his remembrances of his dad were very, 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 very slim. He learnt more about his dad from talking to his older siblings than he did face to face. So my dad never had a father growing up. He had to work out, and this is part of the healing for me, my father had to work out what it meant to be a dad without any example in many ways. He didn't have an example. And so he had to work it out from scratch. And as I became a father and realised how challenging it can be, I started to understand the implications of that for my dad. All right? He had to learn as he went along. And so a part of me started to give my dad for that reason. All right? He hasn't got the knowledge that a lot of others would have had. So most of us learn about parenting from our parents. Part of getting older and becoming parents ourselves is working out what parts of their parenting I'm going to continue and what parts I'm going to leave behind. And that's part of forging our own family. And my dad had none of that. He had no example to work with. But what about when our parents are abusive or do things that hurt us badly? I'm not sure how many of you have ever read the book or seen the movie The Shack. Yeah, John, you've seen it? Okay, there's a few of you here that have seen The Shack. Fascinating story and fascinating movie in many ways. Very controversial in Christian scene, but in Christian settings. Some applauded it, some condemned it. But let me just give you a little bit of a snapshot from the movie, and I would encourage you to watch it. Just watch it carefully but nevertheless, it's a good movie. The main character in the movie is a man called Mac Mackenzie. And Mac grows up with an alcoholic father who constantly beats Mac and his mum. And desperate as a young child, Mac slips poison into one of his father's drinks and kills his father. And Mac carries this guilt and this anger towards his dad all the way into his own marriage, and until one day he and his wife and 3 kids go on a camping trip. And in the midst of the camping trip, the youngest daughter, Missy, is abducted and killed. And that just devastates Mac all over again. Mac is just totally crushed with guilt until one day a mysterious letter is left in his letterbox. And the letter is signed Papa, which was his wife's favourite affectionate name for God. And it invites Mac to go to the shack where his daughter was killed. And so Mac's not sure whether this is a divine summons or a trick, so he equips himself with a gun and he takes off to go to the shack and meet whoever is going to be there. And at the shack, actually, Mac encounters 3 mysterious figures who represent the 3 persons in the Trinity. And this is where some people have difficulty with the movie, but I think there's some beautiful insight that can come. So he meets these 3 members of the Trinity who all start to engage with him over a period of time in conversations around the whole area of forgiveness and of things that go along with that. And so through a series of conversations with Mac, they start to teach him some lessons about these things. For me, one of the most powerful scenes is when he's summoned to a cave. And when he goes into the cave, he sees this mysterious figure called Sophia sitting on a throne at the back of the cave. And she invites him. She says this is the throne of judgment. And she invites him to come and sit on the throne and to act as a judge. And initially he refuses. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. But eventually he does. And so he goes and sits on the throne. And Sophia says to him, okay, so who are we going to judge? And then she starts to run some scenes for him. And one of those scenes is of a child being abused by a father. And as he watches this scene, he's devastated, obviously. And she says to him, should we condemn the child? And he says, absolutely not. It's a child. How can we condemn the child? And she turns to him and she says, you've already done that. That child was your father. See, what she was pointing out to him was the father that abused him had also been abused by a father before him. And so here we have generational curse, isn't it? Spilling down through unfinished father, and so on it goes. So, yes, the books, you can buy the book. The movie is very powerful, so go for the book. Go for the movie if you want it like that. But see, so what he's being taught in this cave scene is that the brokenness of our father becomes our brokenness in some ways, and we pass on that brokenness to the next generation. So, yep, you can read it. Yep, the book will give you a lot more detail. Okay, but the point I want to make tonight is sometimes the road to forgiveness begins when we start to understand that our own fathers received their own brokenness from their fathers. And so we can start to be less judgmental sometimes to our own dads when we realise that is the case. So the point I just want to make is just when we think upwards, when we think to the Father above us, we've sometimes got to recognise that he received things that he in turn passed on to us. So if your father is alive and struggling still, then don't be too quick to condemn him. All earthly fathers reflect incomplete work. And so all fathers start with a mixed bag. So I trust that your experience might be a little bit like mine. Recognising where my dad started helped me to forgive him, helped me to retreat away from some of the anger and bitterness. All right, so then let's just quickly run through dealing with our children. I just want to, I don't know how many of you know Michelangelo, the famous sculptor, of the Renaissance periods. But one of the most famous pieces of work that Michelangelo created was what is called the Statue of David. The Statue of David stands 5 metres tall, and it's carved out of one block of marble. And Michelangelo spent 2 years on this project, chipping away day after day, rain or shine, barely sleeping, barely eating, until he created this amazing achievement. In fact, it stands in the Academic Gallery in Florence, and it's generally agreed there are probably few artworks in the world that can compare to it. Now, what is not as much known about Michelangelo is that in the same gallery leading up to that statue of David, which you can see at the end of the picture there, are 4 other sculptures that Michelangelo started but never completed. They're sometimes referred to as Michelangelo's prisoners. They were intended for Pope Julius's grand tomb, but Michelangelo abandoned them halfway through. So you have these half-finished projects sitting on the side of the gallery as you walk in to look at this amazing statue of David. So they were Michelangelo's unfinished Davids in many ways. Right? And I just want to say that's the same way as it is with our kids. As fathers, we sometimes get distracted and we make mistakes on the way through, and we don't end up finishing our kids as we ought to do. We want, all of us start life as fathers, we all want to make them Davids. But often things turn out so that we don't do that. And so often our kids become unfinished projects in many ways, just like Michelangelo had his own finished project. So if that's the case, then I just want to run through 3 things to do with your own kids. And the first one is up there on the screen. The first thing to do is don't give up. All right, if you're living with a situation where you've got kids that are estranged from you because of the way you grew up or things went wrong, my first encouragement to you is to not give up on that relationship. All right, this is my encouragement to my friend who didn't come tonight. Don't give up. Don't give up on it. All right, God doesn't give up on those relationships. God is in the business of always restoring relationships, and so when He's involved, there's always hope. So don't give up on it. The second thing to do with our kids when we've hurt them is to acknowledge wrongdoing. And if we need to, go back to our kids and say to them, you know what? I did you wrong. There might be reasons for it, but acknowledge wrongdoing. We might need to go back to them and say, years ago, kids, I did it wrong to you. I did something I shouldn't have done. I was not the kind of father I should have been. And so acknowledging the wrongdoing. All right, so don't give up, acknowledge the wrongdoing. And lastly, say sorry. All right, say sorry. Carol and I were just talking about this the other day, and neither of us, interestingly, can ever remember our fathers ever saying sorry. Never. Now, I think there was cultural reasons for that. When our fathers were alive, you didn't acknowledge weakness. That was part of how life was. Didn't acknowledge weakness. But we can never remember our fathers saying sorry. Now, we know they did things wrong because we felt it. And I'm sure that my dad knew at times that he had done wrong, but he never said sorry. All right? I think we need to learn as parents to say sorry. It makes a huge difference. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a visit from a friend whose father headed up an organisation that I first went to work with when we arrived in Sydney 25 years ago. And he came to me and he just blew me away. He said, I don't know much of the detail. He said, but I'm under the impression that my dad shafted you when you were working with this organisation. And he said, if that's the case, I just want to say sorry. Now, I said to him, look, there was a lot of stuff on my side of it too, and I wasn't expecting it. But you know what? It somehow lifted some of the anger that was still residual there towards his dad. I thought I'd dealt with it. But when he came to me and said, look, I just want to say sorry, it somehow freed me from that. It's amazing how powerful saying sorry can be, right? And, you know, as fathers, we need to learn to do this, right? When we do wrong to our kids, we need to say sorry. And it's just not, I'm sorry. No, we name the mistake. I lost my temper, and that was wrong. I'm sorry. Or I misjudged you. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Now, it's not merely that it's important to name it for what it is, but you see, we're training our kids as we do that. Because we're helping our kids to understand when they do something wrong, the process to follow. Yes, they come to us and say, I did X, I'm sorry. And as dads, as we do that, it's amazing how powerful it actually is, all right? There's been a few times in my life where I've had to say sorry to our kids, and the restoration of the relationship that has come has been profound. Yeah, they knew it, but to hear me say it was life-giving for them, all right? I didn't do it well, but we need to learn as dads to do it well. Because we're incomplete. We're still broken. We're going to make those mistakes. How we handle them is the critical thing. So learn to say sorry. All right? So don't give up. Acknowledge wrongdoing and say sorry. All right, let me just conclude. As I reflect back on the last years of my dad's life, I think my dad had some deep regrets in the end. That was hidden a little bit because of the dementia, but I think amidst that dementia, as it was coming, there was an awareness on his part of the fact that there's some things that he wished that he'd done differently. I think that was part of my dad's regrets in those years. And you know what? I wish that too. I wanted more of the dad that I fell in love with in the end. I wish I'd had more time with that dad. I wanted the dad who in the end, who had often been, throughout my life, had been so critical of other people. Dad was very critical. And in those last 5 years, he started to gently rebuke us as we were critical of other people. He said, no, don't talk that way about them. You don't need to criticise them. That was the transformation that occurred in my dad. It was just amazing. I wish I had more time with that dad. But wasn't to be. But you know what? One of the greatest joys that I had in burying my dad was the knowledge that the state of incompleteness that he had arrived at was still not the end. All right? And with this, I want to come back to that Bible verse that we began with at the beginning. So listen again to what the Apostle Paul said to those believers in Philippi. And I'm sure of this is something he's absolutely certain about, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. You see what Paul is saying? Once God begins a work in us, he just doesn't leave it uncompleted, as Michelangelo did with some of his projects. No, God keeps working until he's created the statue of David. Right? He never gives up halfway. He never abandons us as too much hard work. Others might do that, but God never does. No, he keeps working, and he's committed to bringing it to completion. But note also, when God keeps working, it's until the day of Jesus Christ. And that little expression, the day of Jesus Christ, it refers to the end of time, when God has raised all believers from the dead and glorified them in heaven. So it's a future thing, all right? So we all get to the end of our lives and we're all buried, still unfinished. But God says on the other side of it, I'm going to finish this good work that I've begun. So when I next see my dad, he will be stunningly glorious. All the broken stuff will be taken away, and all that will remain will be an absolutely perfect dad. That's who I'm going to meet one day again. All right? That's not because Dad will have done it. That's because God will have done it on the other side. All right? That's the amazing thing about the resurrection that's coming for us all, right? And that's the case for any of us. That's the case for any of us who are prepared to acknowledge to our God that we've done him wrong, we've misjudged him, we rejected him as our rightful owner and Lord. And that's the starting point for restoring our relationship with God. Acknowledging to him that all along we've pushed him away, said we're nothing to do with you. The point where we establish a relationship with God is where we come back to him and said, I've done you wrong. You are my rightful owner, you're my rightful Lord, and I will follow you from this day forward. That's what it means to become a Christian. How do you think Michelangelo would have felt if, after working for those 2 years on that big, huge block of marble, presenting it to the city officials, and then they said to him, no, you didn't make that. We made it, and we're running you out of town till you acknowledge that. How do you think he would have felt if that had been the case? Well, that's exactly how God must feel. He's created this amazing world, created us all as we are, and then we push him away and say, no, you're not important. I'm important. Or you don't exist. The multiple ways we disregard God. And the way back is to acknowledge to him, no, you really are the creator and the Lord of this universe, and I repent and I'm coming back to you. And I'm re-establishing our relationship on that basis. At that point, he says to us, okay, let's take this block of marble and let's finish it. And that's what God does for all of those that follow him. He says, block of marble, we're going to make you into a statue of David. That's what's in store for all of us as Christians. And boy, am I looking forward to seeing my dad once God done that work on him. All right. Now, I just want to finish with a song by a songwriter called Steve Green, and he just puts these words of Philippians to music. And so it's about a 3-minute song, so just listen to it. As you're listening to it, if you need to do something, talk to God in your heart about some stuff, now's the chance to do it. And then after that, I'm going to give thanks. We're going to have dinner together. So let's just listen to the song now as I play it.